The elevator doors slid open on the 23rd floor, and Ethan Kellerman steadied the hand truck beneath him. 3 packages for Suite 2315, all marked fragile. He'd been making deliveries for Rapidway Express for 2 years now, and the rhythm of it had become almost meditative. Load the truck before dawn, navigate the city streets, climb stairs or ride elevators, knock on doors, collect signatures, repeat. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest, and that mattered to him. The cross his grandmother had given him shifted against his chest as he maneuvered the hand truck down the hallway. She'd pressed it into his palm 3 years ago, right after his father's funeral, her weathered fingers closing his around the silver chain. "When the world gets heavy," she'd said, "remember who carries you." He knocked on Suite 2315. No answer. He knocked again, louder this time. A voice erupted from inside. "Coming! For the love of just wait!" Ethan stepped back, rechecking the label. Grant Sutherland. Priority overnight delivery. The door swung open, and Ethan found himself face to face with a man approximately his own age, but living in what appeared to be a completely different world. The man wore navy blue pajamas with white piping, expensive silk by the look of them, and held a coffee mug in one hand. His dark hair was styled even at this early hour, his beard immaculately trimmed. Behind him, the suite stretched out in beige and cream elegance, all modern furniture and ambient lighting. "Finally," the man said. "Do you have any idea what time it is? These were supposed to be here by 7. Ethan glanced at his watch. 7:04. "I apologize for the delay, sir. Traffic on. I don't want to hear excuses." The man set his mug down on a side table with enough force to make it clatter. "I'm in the middle of closing a deal worth more than you make in 5 years, and I can't do that without the contracts in these boxes." "I understand, sir. If you could just sign, you understand?" The man stepped closer, and Ethan caught the sharp scent of expensive cologne. "Do you have any comprehension of what's at stake here? I have 7 different investors waiting on a conference call that starts in 10 minutes. 10 minutes. Because of your incompetence, I'm scrambling." Ethan felt heat rise in his chest. He'd woken up at 4 in the morning. He'd fought through an accident on the interstate that had backed up traffic for miles. He'd skipped breakfast to make sure every delivery on his route arrived as close to on time as possible. And here was this man, standing in his silk pajamas in his luxury suite, calling him incompetent. "Sir, I apologize for any inconvenience." Ethan kept his voice level, though his jaw tightened. "But I need you to sign for the packages." The man snatched the electronic signature pad from Ethan's hand, scrawled something illegible across it, and thrust it back. "You people have no idea what it takes to succeed in this world. No work ethic. No sense of responsibility. You think showing up 4 minutes late is acceptable? In my world, 4 minutes can cost millions." Ethan wanted to say something. He wanted to point out that he'd been working since before this man had even opened his eyes. He wanted to mention the accidents, the traffic, the fact that he was doing his best with circumstances beyond his control. But the words caught in his throat, trapped behind his grandmother's voice. A soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. "I hope you have a good day, sir." Ethan lifted the boxes onto his hand truck and maneuvered them into the suite's entryway. "Don't drop those." The man hovered as Ethan carefully set each box on the floor. "Do you know how much those contracts are worth? More than you'll make in your entire life, probably." Ethan straightened, every muscle in his body taut with the effort of keeping his expression neutral. The man was still talking, still pointing, still berating him for sins both real and imagined. The 4-minute delay had somehow expanded into a referendum on Ethan's entire existence, his work ethic, his intelligence, his worth as a human being. "Are you even listening to me?" The man stepped forward, jabbing a finger toward Ethan's chest. "Yes, sir." Ethan's voice came out quieter than he'd intended. "Is there anything else you need?" "What I need is for people to do their jobs." The man picked up his coffee mug, took a sip, and grimaced. "Now it's cold. Thanks for that, too." Ethan nodded, collected his hand truck, and walked back toward the elevator. His hands shook slightly as he pressed the button. Behind him, he heard the door to suite 2315 slam shut. The elevator arrived empty, a small mercy. Ethan stepped inside and leaned against the wall, closing his eyes. The anger sat in his chest like a stone, heavy and hot. He'd been insulted before. It came with the territory of service work. But something about this morning's encounter felt different, more personal, more cutting. "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do." His grandmother's voice again, quoting words that had been spoken from across 2,000 years ago. She had a quote for everything, his grandmother. Sometimes it irritated him, but right now, standing alone in a descending elevator, with his pride bruised and his patience exhausted, he found himself grateful for the familiar words. He pulled out his phone and typed a quick message to his girlfriend, Sarah. "Rough start to the morning. Some people just want to make you feel small." Her response came immediately. "You're not small. You're exactly the right size. Coffee after your shift?" Despite everything, Ethan smiled. "Yes, please." Yard. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of addresses and signatures. Ethan delivered packages to an elderly woman who insisted on telling him about her grandson's wedding, a college student who answered the door in a bathrobe and barely grunted a thank you, and a young mother with a crying baby who apologized 3 times for taking so long to sign. Each interaction was its own small world, its own story, and by the time his lunch break arrived, the encounter with Grant Sutherland had begun to fade into the background noise of the day. Ethan pulled his truck into a parking spot near Riverside Park and unwrapped the sandwich Sarah had made for him the night before, turkey and Swiss with just a hint of mustard, exactly the way he liked it. He'd met Sarah at church 3 years ago, right after his father died, when he'd been angry at God and the world and everyone in between. She'd been volunteering in the children's ministry, and he'd been dragged there by his grandmother, who refused to let him wallow. "Your father would want you to find your way back," his grandmother had said, and because he couldn't bear to disappoint her, he'd gone. Sarah had been leading a group of 7-year-olds through a lesson about the prodigal son when he'd first seen her. She'd made the older brother's resentment sound so reasonable, so understandable, before gently explaining why forgiveness mattered anyway. Ethan had stood in the back of the room, watching her, and felt something shift inside him. It took him 3 months to work up the courage to ask her out. She'd said yes immediately, laughing at how nervous he was, and they'd been together ever since. She was studying to be a counselor now, taking night classes while working at a non-profit that helped homeless youth. Every time Ethan felt sorry for himself, he thought about Sarah listening to teenagers describe nightmares he couldn't imagine, and his own problems seemed smaller. His phone buzzed, a text from dispatch. "Additional pickup at Mercy General Hospital. Patient discharge. Needs documents signed and transported to insurance company. Can you take it?" Ethan sighed. His shift technically ended in 2 hours, but the hospital was on his route home, and the extra money would help with Sarah's tuition. "Yes. Send details." The hospital appeared on his GPS 3 minutes later. Mercy General, 5th floor. Patient name Oliver Sutherland, age 7. Discharge paperwork needed signatures and immediate delivery to Grandview Insurance on Foster Street. Sutherland. Ethan's chest tightened. Surely not. It was a common enough name. The city had thousands of Sutherlands. No reason to assume this had anything to do with the man in the silk pajamas, but as he pulled into the hospital parking lot and checked the secondary contact information, he saw it. Grant Sutherland, father. Phone number matching the contact information from the morning's delivery. Of course. Ethan sat in the truck for a moment, weighing his options. He could call dispatch, claim he'd eaten something bad at lunch, ask them to send another driver. It would be easy enough. But the thought of lying, even about something so small, made him uncomfortable. And more than that, the image of a 7-year-old boy waiting for discharge paperwork felt more important than his own bruised ego. Love your enemies, his grandmother would say. Pray for those who persecute you. He's not my enemy, Ethan muttered to himself. He's just a jerk. But he went inside anyway. The 5th floor of Mercy General smelled like disinfectant and cafeteria food. Ethan approached the nurse's station, where a tired-looking woman in scrubs glanced up from her computer. Pick up for Oliver Sutherland? Ethan showed her his ID badge. She nodded toward room 512. They're still getting him ready. You can wait in the family lounge if you want. The family lounge consisted of worn chairs, outdated magazines, and a television playing a cooking show with the sound off. Ethan sat down and pulled out his phone, trying to catch up on emails, but his attention kept drifting to the hallway. Somewhere down there, a 7-year-old boy was preparing to leave the hospital, and his father was probably pacing and checking his watch and finding new things to be angry about. Footsteps approached, rapid and sharp. Ethan looked up and felt his stomach drop. Grant Sutherland burst into the family lounge, still wearing what looked like the same clothes from this morning. Different now, a charcoal business suit instead of pajamas, but the same expression of barely contained fury. He had his phone pressed to his ear. I don't care what the schedule says, Karen. I need those contracts processed today. Today, do you understand? He paced past Ethan without a glance. Because if they're not processed, the entire deal falls through, and I will personally make sure you're looking for a new job by Monday. He ended the call and threw himself into a chair across from Ethan, running both hands through his hair. Then he looked up, and recognition flickered across his face. You, he said it like an accusation. Sir. Ethan kept his voice neutral. I'm here to pick up discharge paperwork for your son. Of course you are. Grant laughed, but there was no humor in it, because this day wasn't complicated enough already. They sat in silence for a moment. Ethan studied the man across from him, seeing details he'd missed this morning. The exhaustion around his eyes, the way his hands trembled slightly, the wrinkled corner of his collar as if he'd been pulling at it. Is your son all right? Ethan asked quietly. Grant looked at him sharply, as if checking for mockery, then seemed to deflate. Asthma attack. Severe one. He's fine now, but he scared the life out of me. I'm sorry. And Ethan meant it, despite everything. Yeah, well, Grant looked away. It's been a day. Before Ethan could respond, a nurse appeared in the doorway. Mr. Sutherland, Oliver's asking for you. Grant stood immediately, the businessman mask sliding back into place. I'll be right there. He glanced at Ethan. This paperwork thing, how long is it going to take? Just a few signatures. Then I take it directly to the insurance company. Fine. Grant walked away without another word. Ethan settled back into his chair, his mind churning. The man was clearly stressed. That didn't excuse his behavior this morning, but it provided context. A sick child, a high-stakes business deal, the pressure of trying to be everywhere at once. Ethan thought about his own father, who'd worked himself into an early grave, trying to provide for their family, and felt an unwelcome twinge of sympathy. 20 minutes passed, then 30. Ethan sent a message to dispatch explaining the delay. He responded to Sarah's text asking how his day was going with a brief, complicated, "Tell you later." Finally, Grant reappeared, this time holding a stack of papers and looking marginally calmer. He thrust them at Ethan without ceremony. "Sign where the tabs are," Ethan said, offering a pen. Grant scrawled his signature on 4 different pages, each movement sharp and impatient. "You need to get these to the insurance company by 3. Ethan checked his watch. 2:15. "That should be fine." "Should be isn't good enough." Grant's voice hardened again. "My son's prescriptions are linked to this paperwork. If there's any delay, I understand, sir. I'll make sure it gets there on time." Grant studied him for a moment, something unreadable passing across his face. Then he nodded once and walked away. Ethan collected the paperwork, double-checked that all the signatures were in place, and headed for the elevator. The insurance company was 15 minutes away under normal traffic conditions. He should make it with time to spare. He should have known better than to count on normal conditions. The accident happened at the corner of Foster and 12th, right in front of the Grandview Insurance Building. Two cars, a taxi and a SUV, had collided in the intersection, and now both drivers stood in the street, arguing while traffic backed up in all directions. Ethan watched the minutes tick past on his dashboard clock. 2:45, 2:50, 2:55. He pulled out his phone and called the insurance company. "This is Ethan Kellerman with Rapidway Express. I have urgent discharge paperwork for Oliver Sutherland, but I'm stuck in traffic from an accident. I'm literally across the street from your building. Is there any way someone can meet me?" The woman on the phone put him on hold. Ethan watched the clock. 2:57, 2:58. "Sir, we're closing at 3, and our systems go down for the weekend at 3:05. If you're not here by then, I'm coming." Ethan ended the call, grabbed the paperwork and jumped out of his truck. He ran across the street, dodging stopped cars and angry drivers, his heart pounding. The insurance building loomed ahead. He could see the glass doors, almost there. A sound stopped him, high-pitched, desperate, a child's scream. Ethan spun around. In the chaos of the accident scene, a crowd had gathered, all of them focused on the two arguing drivers. But off to the side, near the edge of the intersection, a small figure had wandered into the street. A boy, maybe 7 years old, with dark hair and a hospital ID bracelet still around his wrist. Oliver Sutherland. Time seemed to slow. Ethan saw the truck before the boy did. A delivery truck, bigger than his own, barreling down the cross street toward the intersection. The driver's attention was on his phone, not the road. The boy stood frozen in the truck's path, his eyes wide with terror. Ethan didn't think, he ran. His body slammed into Oliver's, knocking them both clear of the truck's path. They hit the pavement hard, Ethan instinctively twisting to take the impact on his own shoulder. The truck roared past, its horn blaring belatedly, and Ethan felt the wind of its passage ruffle his hair. For a moment, everything was silent. Then Oliver started crying, great gasping sobs that shook his small frame. Ethan sat up carefully, checking the boy for injuries. "Are you okay? Did you hit your head?" Oliver shook his head, still crying. His inhaler had fallen from his pocket and lay broken on the pavement. The boy's breathing started to hitch, wheezing. "Where's your father?" Ethan looked around frantically. "Where's your dad?" "He went back." Oliver's voice was barely a whisper. "To the hospital. He forgot something. A nurse is supposed to be watching me. But she went inside to get someone, and I saw... Another wheeze, this one worse. Oliver's lips were starting to turn pale. Ethan scooped the boy up and ran toward the insurance building. The glass doors were locked. Through them, he could see a receptionist walking away, shutting down her computer. He pounded on the glass. "Help! I need help!" The receptionist turned, saw him, and pointed at her watch. 3:04. She mouthed the words, "We're closed." "This boy needs help!" Ethan shouted. "Please!" The woman hesitated, then hurried to unlock the door. "What happened?" "Asthma attack. He dropped his inhaler. Do you have any medical supplies?" "Call 911. The receptionist pulled out her phone, while Ethan carried Oliver to a chair. The boy was struggling to breathe now, his chest heaving with the effort. Ethan positioned him upright, remembering something his grandmother had told him years ago about helping asthma patients. "Oliver, listen to me." He kept his voice calm. "Breathe through your nose, slowly, pursed lips when you breathe out, like you're blowing out a candle. Can you do that?" Oliver tried. His small face scrunched with concentration. The wheezing didn't improve. "Ambulance is on the way," the receptionist said. 5 minutes. 5 minutes felt like an eternity. Ethan sat with Oliver, talking to him in a low, steady voice. He told him about his dog, a golden retriever named Buddy. He told him about the funny thing that happened at church last Sunday, when one of the kids in the youth group accidentally set off the fire alarm during a cooking class. He told him anything he could think of to keep the boy calm and distracted. "You're going to be okay," Ethan said, and prayed desperately that it was true. "You're so brave, Oliver. You're doing great." The ambulance arrived in 4 minutes. Paramedics rushed in, took one look at Oliver, and administered a breathing treatment. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, the boy's breathing eased. Color returned to his lips. "You saved his life," one of the paramedics said to Ethan. "If he'd been alone any longer, I just did what anyone would do." "Not anyone." The paramedic gave him an appraising look. "Most people would have frozen or panicked. You kept him calm." The receptionist appeared at Ethan's elbow. "Sir, the paperwork you were trying to deliver, I processed it. Just barely made the deadline." Ethan had completely forgotten about the paperwork. He looked down at his hands, which were still shaking slightly, and realized he was still clutching the envelope. At some point during the rescue, he must have dropped it. The receptionist had picked it up and taken care of everything while he focused on Oliver. "Thank you," he said. "No, thank you." She smiled at him. "That was the bravest thing I've ever seen." The paramedics loaded Oliver onto a stretcher, preparing to take him back to Mercy General. One of them handed Ethan a card. "They're going to want your statement. Can you come by the hospital?" "Of course." Ethan rode in the ambulance with Oliver, holding the boy's hand. Oliver had stopped crying now, but his eyes were red and frightened. "My dad's going to be so mad," Oliver whispered. "Why would he be mad? I wasn't supposed to wander off. I always do things wrong." Ethan's chest tightened. He thought about Grant Sutherland this morning, pointing and shouting about a 4-minute delay. He thought about the pressure in the man's voice, the exhaustion, the fear, and he thought about a 7-year-old boy who believed his father would be angry that he'd nearly died. "Your dad loves you," Ethan said. "When he finds out what happened, he's not going to be mad. He's going to be grateful you're safe. You don't know my dad. Maybe not, but I know something about fathers." Ethan squeezed Oliver's hand gently. "My dad worked really hard. Sometimes he was tired and stressed and he said things he didn't mean. But he loved me more than anything in the world. I bet your dad feels the same way." Oliver looked at him skeptically, but didn't argue. They arrived at Mercy General to find Grant Sutherland already in the emergency room, his face white with panic. A nurse must have called him. He rushed to the stretcher as the paramedics wheeled it in. "Oliver! Oh, God, Oliver!" "He's okay, sir," one of the paramedics said. "Thanks to this man." Grant looked at Ethan for the first time. Really looked at him. Recognition, confusion, and something else, something that might have been shame, passed across his face. "You." "The boy wandered into traffic," Ethan said quietly. "He's safe now." Grant opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came out. He turned back to Oliver, his hand hovering over his son's head, as if afraid to touch him, afraid he might break. "Dad?" Oliver's voice was small. "Are you mad?" "Mad?" Grant's voice cracked. He knelt beside the stretcher, taking his son's hand in both of his. No, buddy, I'm not mad. I'm so glad you're okay." Oliver started crying again, but differently this time. Relief. Grant gathered his son into his arms, careful of the oxygen tubing, and held him close. Ethan stepped back, feeling suddenly like an intruder in a private moment. He turned to leave. "Wait." Grant's voice stopped him. "Please, don't go." Ethan waited while the doctors examined Oliver, while nurses bustled around taking vitals and asking questions. Grant stood beside his son's bed, holding his hand, and for the first time all day, the businessman mask was completely gone. In its place was just a father, terrified and grateful. After 20 minutes, the doctor declared Oliver stable. They'd keep him overnight for observation, but he should be fine. Grant visibly sagged with relief. "Can I talk to you?" Grant approached Ethan in the hallway. "Please, just for a minute." They walked to the same family lounge where Ethan had waited earlier. It felt like a lifetime ago. Grant sank into a chair and buried his face in his hands. "I don't even know how to begin." His voice was muffled. "This morning I said things. It's okay." "No." Grant looked up, and Ethan was startled to see tears in the man's eyes. "It's not okay. I was horrible to you. You didn't deserve any of that. And then you saved my son. You risked your own life to save him. After everything I said to you. Ethan sat down across from him. I wasn't thinking about this morning. I just saw a child in danger. Most people would have let it go. Most people would have thought I deserved it after the way I treated you. Grant shook his head. Why did you help him? It was a question Ethan had been asking himself. The easy answer was because it was the right thing to do, because any decent person would have done the same. But there was a deeper truth, one he wasn't sure Grant would understand. A long time ago, Ethan said slowly, my grandmother told me something. She said the world is full of people carrying heavy burdens we can't see, and our job isn't to judge them. It's to love them anyway. Grant was quiet for a long moment. Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman. She is. Ethan smiled. She quotes the Bible a lot. Sometimes it drives me crazy, but she's usually right. What would she say about this morning? Probably something about forgiveness, how we're all broken people who hurt each other, how God forgives us anyway, how we should do the same for each other. Grant laughed, but it was a broken sound. I don't know much about God. My family stopped going to church when I was a kid, too busy with other things, building a business, making money, proving we were successful. He looked at his hands. I spend so much time trying to prove I'm successful that I forget what actually matters. Your son knows you love him, Ethan said. That's what matters. Does he? Grant's voice dropped to a whisper. I'm not sure I've given him much reason to believe that. I'm always working, always stressed, always, he gestured helplessly, always treating people the way I treated you this morning. Ethan wanted to offer some reassurance, but he couldn't think of anything that didn't sound hollow. Instead, he waited. My wife left me last year, Grant said suddenly. I don't blame her. I was never home. When I was home, I was on my phone or my computer. She said I cared more about deals than about her, about Oliver. I told her she didn't understand the pressure I was under, the responsibility. He laughed bitterly. What responsibility? I can barely keep my son alive. That's not true. You got him to the hospital when he needed help. After he nearly died, because I left him with a nurse I barely knew, so I could go back to my office for 5 minutes. 5 minutes to get a file I didn't even need. I left my son, who'd just been discharged from the hospital, with a stranger because I couldn't stand the thought of being away from work for a few extra minutes. Grant's voice broke completely. What kind of father does that? Ethan didn't have an answer. He thought about his own father, who'd worked himself to death trying to provide. He thought about all the soccer games his dad had missed, all the school plays he'd been too tired to attend. And he thought about the last conversation they'd had the night before his father's heart attack, when Ethan had told him he was proud of him anyway. A father who's trying his best, Ethan said finally. Who's making mistakes, but who clearly loves his son. You can't change what happened, but you can change what happens next. Grant looked at him with something like hope. How? You start by forgiving yourself. Then you make different choices. Smaller steps. You can't fix everything at once, but you can be there for your son tonight, and tomorrow, and the day after that. They sat in silence for a while. Down the hall, Ethan could hear the hospital's familiar sounds, monitors beeping, voices murmuring, carts rolling past, the soundtrack of crisis and healing playing out in 100 different rooms. This morning, Grant said, when I was yelling at you, you had this look on your face, like you wanted to say something, but you didn't. I did want to say something. What was it? Ethan considered lying, softening the truth. But something about this moment, about the rawness of Grant's confession, demanded honesty. I wanted to tell you that you had no idea what my morning was like, that I'd been up since 4, that there was an accident on the interstate that delayed everyone, that I was doing my best, he paused, and I wanted to tell you that being rich doesn't make you better than me. Grant flinched. You're right. About all of it. He met Ethan's eyes. I'm sorry. I can say it 1,000 times, but I don't know if that's enough. It's a start. A nurse appeared in the doorway. Mr. Sutherland, your son is asking for you. Grant stood immediately, then hesitated. Will you come? I think I think Oliver would want to thank you." They walked together to Oliver's room. The boy was sitting up in bed now, an oxygen tube still in his nose, but color back in his cheeks. His eyes lit up when he saw Ethan. "You're the delivery man from this morning." Grant's face went even paler. "You saw that?" "I heard it," Oliver said. "I was in the bedroom. You were being mean to him, Dad." The silence in the room was deafening. Grant looked at his son, at Ethan, at the floor. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "You're right. I was mean to him, and I shouldn't have been." He turned to Ethan. "I'm sorry you heard that, Oliver. That's not the kind of person I want to be. But you were nice to me," Oliver said to Ethan. "In the ambulance, you told me about your dog." "Buddy," Ethan smiled. "He's a good dog. Gets into trouble sometimes, but he means well. Can I meet him?" "Maybe someday." Oliver turned to his father. "The man at the ambulance place said Ethan saved my life." "He did." Grant's voice was thick with emotion. "He absolutely did." Because that's what Christians do," Oliver said matter-of-factly. "Miss Penny says Christians help people even when it's hard." "Who's Miss Penny?" Ethan asked. "My Sunday school teacher. Dad doesn't go to church, but Mom makes sure I do when I'm at her house." Oliver looked at his father. "I wish you'd come with me sometime." Grant sat down on the edge of his son's bed, all the fight gone out of him. "Maybe I should." They talked for a while longer. Oliver told them about Miss Penny's lessons, about how Jesus helped people who everyone else ignored, about the Good Samaritan who stopped to help someone from a group that was supposed to be his enemy, about forgiveness and grace and second chances. "Miss Penny says everyone deserves a second chance," Oliver said. He looked at his father with an expression far too serious for a 7-year-old. "Even dads who yell at delivery men." Grant's laugh was half-sob. "Even dads who yell at delivery men." Eventually, Ethan excused himself. He needed to get back to his truck, call dispatch, explain why his last delivery of the day had taken 4 hours instead of 15 minutes. But as he reached the door, Grant followed him out. "I need to make this right," Grant said. "I want to do something, pay you, give you a reward." "No." Ethan shook his head firmly. "That's not why I did it." "Then why? Really?" Ethan thought about his grandmother, about her endless patience and wisdom, about his father, who'd worked himself to death but had still found time to coach Ethan's little league team, about Sarah, who gave her time and energy to help kids who had nothing, about the God who'd loved him even when he was angry and broken after his father's death. "Because someone helped me once," he said, "when I needed it most, when I didn't deserve it. And they told me to pass it on." Grant nodded slowly. "Your grandmother?" "Her, my girlfriend, my church community, a lot of people." Ethan smiled. "You'd be surprised how many hands go into saving one life." "Tell me something." Grant leaned against the wall. "How do you do it? How do you stay kind when people treat you the way I treated you this morning?" "I don't always," Ethan admitted. "Sometimes I go home and complain to my girlfriend. Sometimes I pray through gritted teeth. Sometimes I fail completely." He paused. "But I try to remember that everyone's fighting a battle I can't see, that hurt people, that the only way to break the cycle is to choose love anyway." "That sounds exhausting." "It is, but it's also the most important thing I can do." Grant was quiet for a moment. Would it be weird if I asked for your number? I'd like to stay in touch. Maybe buy you coffee sometime. Learn more about this faith of yours." Ethan pulled out his phone. They exchanged numbers, and then, on impulse, Ethan said something he hadn't planned. "My church has a service on Sunday mornings, 10 o'clock. If you're interested, you and Oliver are welcome to come." "I don't know anything about church." "That's okay. Neither did I, really, until a few years ago. Someone invited me when I was in a dark place. Changed my life." Grant looked back toward his son's room. "I'll think about it." But they shook hands, and Ethan finally left the hospital. It was after 6 when he reached his truck. The accident had been cleared, traffic was flowing normally, and his phone showed 7 missed calls from dispatch. He called them back, explained the situation in the most abbreviated form possible, and promised a full report in the morning. Then he called Sarah. "Hey," he said when she answered. "Sorry I'm late. It's been a day." "Tell me." So he did. All of it. The morning's humiliation, the paperwork pickup, the rescue, the conversation with Grant. By the time he finished, he was sitting in his truck in the hospital parking lot, and the sun was beginning to set. "You could have called me," Sarah said softly, "during any of this. I would have come. I know, but I think I needed to figure it out on my own." "Did you?" Ethan thought about Grant's question. Why did you help him? He thought about all the easy answers he could have given, all the ways he could have made himself sound heroic or noble or spiritually mature. But the truth was simpler and more complicated than that. "I'm still figuring it out," he admitted. "But I think God puts people in our path for a reason. Sometimes we're the ones who need help. Sometimes we're the ones offering it. And sometimes it's both at the same time." "I love you," Sarah said. "Come home. I made dinner. I love you too. Be there in 20 minutes. He drove home through the sunset, his body aching from the day's violence and his heart somehow full despite everything. The cross around his neck shifted against his chest. A familiar weight, a reminder. When the world gets heavy, remember who carries you. Sunday morning arrived clear and bright. Ethan sat in his usual pew, Sarah beside him, his grandmother on his other side. The service was about to start, and he was trying to focus on the bulletin when Sarah nudged him. "Ethan, look." He followed her gaze to the back of the church. Grant Sutherland stood in the doorway, holding Oliver's hand. They both wore suits that were a little too formal for their casual congregation, but they were here. Grant caught Ethan's eye and gave an uncertain wave. Ethan stood and walked back to meet them. "You came." "We came," Grant said. "I don't know what I'm doing, but Oliver insisted." "That's okay. Nobody really knows what they're doing." Ethan gestured toward his pew. "Want to sit with us?" They did. Ethan made introductions. "Grant and Oliver. This is my girlfriend Sarah and my grandmother Ruth." His grandmother took one look at Grant, then at Ethan, and seemed to understand everything without a word being said. The service began. They sang hymns Grant didn't know, followed by prayers he couldn't quite echo. But Ethan watched him watching Oliver, who sang enthusiastically off-key and seemed completely at home. And when the pastor began his sermon about the parable of the unforgiving servant, about debts cancelled and mercy extended, Ethan saw Grant lean forward, listening intently. After the service, people clustered in the fellowship hall for coffee and donuts. Oliver made a beeline for the children's area, where other kids were building with blocks. Grant stood awkwardly with a paper cup of coffee, clearly out of his element. Ethan's grandmother appeared at Grant's elbow. "You must be the young man my grandson rescued." "Actually, I'm—" Grant paused. "Yes, I suppose I am. He saved my son." "And you?" Ruth looked at him with eyes that seemed to see right through him. "Did he save you too?" Grant's throat worked. "I think maybe he did." Ruth patted his arm. "Good. We could all use a little saving now and then." Over the next weeks, Grant and Oliver became regulars. At first they came sporadically, when Grant's work schedule allowed. But gradually, Sunday mornings became sacred time. Grant rearranged meetings, delegated responsibilities, and showed up. He also started meeting Ethan for coffee on Wednesday mornings before Ethan's shift. They talked about faith and failure, about being a father, about the weight of expectations and the freedom of grace. Grant asked 1,000 questions, some practical, some theological, all searching. "How do you know God is real?" Grant asked one morning. Ethan stirred his coffee. "I don't know that I can prove it to you, but I can tell you what I've experienced. The times I've prayed and felt answered, the people he's put in my life at exactly the right moment, the peace that doesn't make sense given my circumstances." "I want that," Grant said quietly. "That peace. It's available. You just have to ask." 3 months after the accident, Grant invited Ethan and Sarah to dinner at his apartment. Not the luxury hotel suite, but his actual home, a penthouse that was beautiful but lonely. Oliver set the table with serious concentration while Grant attempted to cook spaghetti. "I should have ordered takeout," Grant said, staring at the pasta he'd somehow managed to burn. "It's perfect," Sarah said diplomatically. They ate together, laughing at Grant's culinary failures and Oliver's stories about school. After dinner, while Oliver watched a movie in the living room, the three adults sat on the balcony overlooking the city. "I talked to my ex-wife," Grant said, "about what happened, about the changes I've been trying to make." He looked at his hands. "She's willing to try counseling, family counseling. She says she's seen a difference in Oliver, in how I talk to him." "That's wonderful," Sarah said. "I don't know if we'll get back together. Too much has happened, but maybe we can at least be better co-parents." He looked at Ethan. "I keep thinking about what you said, about making different choices, smaller steps. How's that going?" "Hard. I still want to work 16-hour days. I still get stressed about deals falling through. But now when I start to spiral, I think about Oliver in that hospital bed. About how close I came to losing what matters most." He paused. "And I think about you, pulling him out of that truck's path. How you didn't hesitate. How you just acted. Anyone would have done the same." "No," Grant shook his head firmly. "They wouldn't have. Most people would have hesitated, calculated the risk, worried about themselves. You just loved." He met Ethan's eyes. "That's what I want to learn. How to just love." "It's not something you learn overnight," Ethan said. "It's a practice, a daily choice. Pastor Mike said something similar last week, about discipleship being about daily surrender." Grant smiled. "I'm starting to understand what that means." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the city. Somewhere below them, 1,000,000 people were living their lives, carrying their burdens, fighting their battles. Ethan thought about all the mornings he'd woken up before dawn to deliver packages, all the doors he'd knocked on, all the brief encounters that had seemed insignificant at the time. "Can I tell you something?" Grant said. "I've replayed that morning in my head 100 times. The morning I yelled at you. Every time I try to figure out what I was really angry about. And it wasn't about the 4-minute delay. It was about control. About feeling like everything in my life was spinning out of my grasp. Oliver's health, my marriage, my business. I couldn't control any of it, and that terrified me." He laughed softly. "So I took it out on you, because you were safe. Because I could control that interaction at least." "I get that," Ethan said. "After my dad died, I was angry at everyone. The doctors who couldn't save him, God for letting it happen, myself for not spending more time with him. My girlfriend here can tell you, I wasn't easy to be around." Sarah squeezed his hand. "You were grieving, that's allowed. But at some point, grief becomes a weapon if we're not careful. We use it to hurt others, to justify our cruelty." Ethan looked at Grant. "You stopped. That's what matters. You recognized what you were doing and you changed. Because you showed me what the alternative looks like." Grant's voice was thick with emotion. "You showed me grace when I deserved condemnation. You saved my son when you could have walked away. You invited me to church when I'd been nothing but cruel to you." He wiped his eyes. "That's what love looks like. And that's what finally broke through." The door to the balcony slid open, and Oliver appeared, rubbing his eyes sleepily. "Dad, I'm tired." Grant scooped his son up, holding him close. "Time for bed, buddy. Can Ethan read me a story?" Grant looked at Ethan, who nodded. They went inside together to Oliver's room, where Ethan read from a children's Bible about David and Goliath. Oliver fell asleep before the story ended, his small hand still clutching Ethan's sleeve. Grant walked Ethan and Sarah to the door. "Thank you," he said, "for everything, for being patient with me, for showing me what faith looks like in action." "We're family now," Ethan said. "That's what family does." 6 months later, on a Sunday morning that felt suspended in grace, Grant stood in front of their church congregation. Pastor Mike had his hand on Grant's shoulder, asking the questions that marked the transition from seeking to believing. Grant answered each one clearly, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "And do you accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, trusting in his death and resurrection for your salvation?" "I do." The baptism happened immediately after, in a portable tank that the church set up once a month. Grant went under the water old and came up new, and the congregation erupted in applause. Oliver was crying, happy tears streaming down his face. Ethan stood with Sarah and his grandmother, watching Grant emerge from the water with an expression of pure joy, and felt his own eyes fill. His grandmother squeezed his hand. "You did good, boy," she whispered. "I just drove a truck," Ethan said. "No." Ruth looked at him with fierce love. "You loved your enemy. You showed him Jesus. That's the work of the kingdom." After the service, during the celebration lunch that followed every baptism, Grant pulled Ethan aside. "I know we've talked about this before," Grant said, "but I need to say it again. Thank you for saving Oliver's life, for saving mine." "I think we saved each other," Ethan said, and it was true. In the months since that terrible, wonderful day, Ethan had watched Grant transform. The angry businessman had softened into a father who prioritized his son, a seeker who asked hard questions, a man learning to surrender control and trust in something bigger than himself. But Ethan had changed too. The encounter had reminded him why his work mattered, why every interaction, even the difficult ones, carried the potential for grace. "I have something for you," Grant said. He pulled an envelope from his pocket. "Don't open it now, open it later." Ethan took the envelope, feeling its weight. "Grant." "It's not money," Grant said quickly. "I know you'd refuse that. It's something else, something I hope you'll accept." Later that evening, sitting on his couch with Sarah, Ethan opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, handwritten in Grant's precise script. "Ethan, I spent 34 years building a life based on success, money, and power. I thought those things would make me happy, make me worthy, but they just made me hollow. Then you showed me what actual worth looks like, not in achievement or accumulation, but in sacrifice and service. You risked your life for my son without hesitation. You offered forgiveness when you had every right to hold a grudge. You invited me into your community when I was a stranger. That's the kind of person I want to be. That's the kind of father I want to be for Oliver. I can't repay what you did, but I can honor it by living differently, by choosing love over anger, grace over judgment, faith over fear. Thank you for being the hands and feet of Jesus to me and my son. Thank you for showing us the way home." With gratitude and brotherly love, Grant Sarah read over his shoulder, tears streaming down her face. "Ethan, this is beautiful." "It is," Ethan agreed. He folded the letter carefully and tucked it back into the envelope. "It really is." The next morning, Ethan woke before dawn, as always. He loaded his truck with packages, checked his route, and headed out into the city. The streets were quiet this early, the sun just beginning to paint the horizon in shades of gold and pink. He thought about Grant's letter, about Oliver's joy at his father's baptism, about the way God took one terrible morning and used it to transform multiple lives. The anger, the rescue, the reconciliation, all of it woven together into something that looked like redemption. His phone buzzed. A text from Grant. "Coffee Wednesday. Want to talk to you about something." Ethan smiled and replied, "Of course. See you then." The elevator in his first building carried him to the 14th floor. He knocked on apartment 1408 and waited. When the door opened, he greeted the elderly woman with a smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Patterson. I have your package." "Oh, bless you, dear. You're always so kind." She signed for the package and handed him back the clipboard. "Have a wonderful day." "You too, Mom." As he walked back to the elevator, Ethan touched the cross at his neck. A reminder of who carried him. A reminder that every interaction, every delivery, every moment was an opportunity to show love. The elevator doors opened, and he stepped inside, ready for whatever the day would bring. ready to love anyway.